The hand connected with a sound that was both wet and sharp, a crack of bone and tissue that echoed in the unnaturally quiet hospital corridor. It was not a sound that belonged there, among the soft squeak of rubber soles and the gentle hum of life support machinery. It was a sound of violation, stark and ugly. For a frozen moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, caught in the aftershock of the blow. Alara felt the impact before she heard it. A bright, searing flash of white-hot pain exploded across her cheek, turning the world into a blur of spinning lights and distorted shapes. Her head snapped to the side with a force that sent a jolt down her spine. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, coppery and warm. She stumbled back, one hand flying instinctively to her cheek, the other pressing protectively against the gentle swell of her belly beneath the crisp fabric of her nurse's scrubs. She did not scream. Screaming was a luxury she had unlearned long ago. Screaming was a performance, an admission of pain that he would only see as weakness, as something to be either scorned or savored. Alara had spent the last 2 years of her life with Marcus Kwan learning the art of silence, the kind of silence that does not echo, the kind that settles heavy and dense, a shield forged in the crucible of endurance. "You have an obligation," Marcus hissed, his voice a low, furious tremor in the sterile air. His face, usually a mask of sculpted arrogant beauty, was twisted into a grotesque sneer. His expensive, tailored suit seemed out of place, an ink-black stain against the pale green walls of the corridor. He was a predator who had wandered out of his jungle and into a place of healing, and he had brought his savagery with him. He took a step forward, closing the space she had tried to create. His hand, the one that had just struck her, was still raised slightly, fingers curled into a loose fist. He was not finished. He was working himself into the familiar rhythm of his rage, a storm she knew all too well. "You don't just walk away from me, Alara. You don't walk away from this." He gestured vaguely between them, a sweeping motion that was meant to encompass their shared history, their shattered apartment, her pregnancy. To him, it was all an asset column in his personal ledger. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that existed only in the fragile architecture of his own ego. Alara's vision began to clear. The spinning lights coalesced back into the long fluorescent tubes on the ceiling. The distorted shapes resolved into the concerned face of Maya, her colleague, who stood frozen a few feet away, a tray of medication clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Witnesses. This was new. Marcus had always preferred his cruelty to be private, a secret kept between the oppressor and the oppressed. His audacity in this public space was a measure of his desperation. She kept her hand on her belly, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos. The faint, fluttering movement within was a reminder of why this time had to be different. This was not just about her survival anymore. It was about the small, innocent life she carried. "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady, low and devoid of the terror that was clawing at her throat. He had grabbed her upper arm while she was disoriented, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. His grip tightened, a cruel and immediate answer. "You will come with me. We will discuss this at home." "I don't have a home with you anymore," she replied, each word a carefully placed stone building a wall he could not breach. "I told you, it's over." "Over?" He laughed, a short, barking sound that held no humor. It was the sound of a man who believed he owned the world and everyone in it. To him, the concept of being left was an absurdity, a glitch in the matrix of his own making. Marcus Kwan was the one who did the leaving. He was the one who discarded people when they were no longer useful or amusing. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry with whispers of darker affiliations clinging to him like expensive cologne. He was a man who collected beautiful things, and Alara, with her quiet grace and sharp intellect, had been his prize acquisition. "Nothing is over until I say it is," he snarled, pulling her closer. "You are carrying my child. You belong to me." It was then that a new sound entered the corridor. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was the soft, almost imperceptible click of a heavy office door swinging shut down the hall. It was followed by the sound of deliberate, unhurried footsteps on the polished linoleum floor. The footsteps were steady, measured, and carried a weight that seemed to press down on the very air. They did not rush. They were not performing. Marcus was too consumed by his own fury to notice. He was leaning in, his face close to hers, his breath hot and foul with rage. "You will sign the papers, the prenuptial agreement. We will present a united front. My family has standards." The footsteps stopped. A profound silence fell over the corridor. It was a different kind of silence than Alara's. Hers was a shield. This was a presence. It was the kind of quiet that happens in a forest when a great predator is near, when every small creature freezes, knowing that a king has entered his domain. Maya took a small, involuntary step back, her eyes fixed on something over Marcus's shoulder. The low hum of the machinery seemed to fade into nothingness. A voice, calm and low as a deep river, cut through the tension. "Take your hand off my sister." It was not a request. It was not a threat. It was a statement of an inevitable outcome, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who had never in his life had to repeat himself. The voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. Marcus froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. It was the reaction of an animal that has been stalking its prey, only to look up and find itself in the shadow of a much larger, more dangerous hunter. He slowly, reluctantly turned his head. Elara already knew who it was. That voice was woven into the fabric of her earliest memories, a constant, reassuring presence in a childhood that had been fractured and uncertain. Julian Vance stood about 10 feet away, his hands resting lightly in the pockets of his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He was a man built of stillness and quiet observation. Where Marcus was all performative swagger and explosive energy, Julian was a study in absolute composure. His dark hair was neatly styled, his face a calm, handsome mask that revealed nothing. But his eyes were ancient and sharp, and they were fixed on Marcus's hand, still clamped around Alara's arm. The power in the hallway did not just shift, it evaporated from one man and consolidated entirely in the other. Marcus, who had filled the space with his rage and his presence, suddenly seemed small, gaudy, a cheap imitation of power. Julian's power was structural. It was in the foundation of the building, in the quiet deference of the hospital administrator who now hovered nervously at the edge of the scene, in the very air they breathed. He owned this hospital, or, more accurately, the charitable foundation that owned this hospital was a minor subsidiary of a holding company that he controlled. It was a footnote in his vast, sprawling empire. Marcus's face, which had been a mask of fury, now cycled through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, then recognition, then a dawning, sickening horror. He knew who Julian Vance was. Everyone in their rarefied world knew. But the connection was not computing. The file was not updating. "Vance," Marcus managed to say, his voice a strained croak. He tried to inject his usual arrogance into the name, but it came out thin and reedy. Julian's gaze finally lifted from Marcus's hand to his face. It was a cold, dispassionate look, the look of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. "I will not say it again." The command was so quiet, Alara barely heard it, but Marcus reacted as if he had been struck. His fingers spasmed open, releasing her arm as if it had been burned. He took a clumsy step back, his carefully constructed persona crumbling into dust. Elara swayed on her feet, the release of his grip making her feel suddenly lightheaded. A strong, steady hand gripped her elbow, but this one was different. It was gentle, supportive. Maya was at her side, her face a mixture of fear and fierce loyalty. "I've got you," she whispered. Julian took a slow step forward. He did not look at Alara yet. His focus was entirely on the man who had hurt her. A second man, dressed in a similar dark suit but with the unmistakable bearing of professional security, materialized at Julian's side. This was Elias, a man who seemed to exist in the spaces between moments, always present, never seen until he was needed. "Mr. Kwan," Julian said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You are trespassing on private property, and you have committed an assault. 2, in fact. 1 against a member of my staff." He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod in Maya's direction. "And 1 against a member of my family." Marcus's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The word family hung in the air, a final, fatal piece of information clicking into place in his panicked mind. He looked from Julian's cold, impassive face to Alara's bruised one, and the last vestiges of his bravado shattered. He was working from a version of her that was so catastrophically wrong it had just cost him everything. He had seen her as an orphan, a brilliant but unconnected woman he could mold and control. He had never once considered that her roots might run deeper and harder than his own. "Security," Julian said, the word a soft command to Elias. It was all that was needed. 2 more men, uniformed hospital security this time, appeared as if summoned from the walls themselves. They moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of extensive training. They flanked Marcus, their presence large and immovable. "This is a misunderstanding," Marcus stammered, holding up his hands. The performance was back, but it was a desperate, flimsy one. He was playing to an audience that was no longer watching him. "She's my fiancée. She's emotional. The pregnancy." Julian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something truly dangerous sparking in their depths. It was the first crack in his placid facade. "She is not your fiancée, and you will never speak of her or her child again. Do you understand me?" Marcus stared, his mouth agape. The sheer, absolute authority in Julian's voice was something he had never encountered. He had always been the one to issue edicts, to command and be obeyed. To be on the receiving end of it was so disorienting that he could not form a response. "Elias," Julian said, his tone turning dismissive, "ensure he is removed from the premises, and begin the protocol. Article 5. Elias nodded once, a sharp, precise movement. "Immediately, sir." He turned to the security guards. "Escort Mr. Kwan to the main entrance. Do not allow him to speak to anyone. He will be met there." Met. The word was so simple, so mundane, yet it carried the weight of a death sentence. Marcus seemed to understand. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. "Wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Vance, Julian, we can talk about this." But Julian had already turned away. He was finished with Marcus Kwan. He had been dismissed, deleted, archived. The guards took Marcus by the arms, their grips firm and unyielding. He did not resist. He stumbled along between them, a man hollowed out, his expensive suit now looking like a cheap costume on a broken doll. As they led him away, his shoulders were slumped, his head bowed, a picture of absolute ruin. The corridor was quiet again, but it was a new kind of quiet. A quiet filled with the aftermath of a storm and the promise of a strange, unsettling safety. Only then did Julian turn his full attention to Alara. He moved toward her, his unhurried grace a stark contrast to Marcus's frantic energy. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. His eyes, which had been so cold and hard, softened as they took in her bruised cheek, the faint tremor in her hands, the fierce, protective way she guarded her own body. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice now gentle, laced with a concern that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. Alara could only nod, the words trapped in her throat. The adrenaline that had sustained her was beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion and a pain that was more than just physical. The dam of her composure, which had held for so long against so much, was beginning to crack. "I saw," he said quietly. From my office down the hall. I saw the entire thing. He had not rushed. He had not performed. He had assessed, and then he had acted with a terrifying and absolute precision. He looked at Maya, who was still holding Alara's elbow. Thank you, Maya, for staying with her. He knew her name. Of course, he knew her name. Maya just nodded, looking awed and terrified in equal measure. She's one of us, she said, a simple statement of profound loyalty. Julian's gaze returned to Alara. He saw the faint sheen of tears in her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. He saw the proud, straight line of her spine, even now. He saw the strength that Marcus had mistaken for weakness. He saw her. For the first time in a very long time, Ilara felt truly seen. Let's get you out of here, he said softly. You're coming home. The journey from the hospital was a silent, suspended passage through the city. Julian's car was not merely a vehicle. It was a mobile fortress, a capsule of profound silence and security. The windows were tinted so dark that the world outside was reduced to a muted, abstract blur of light and motion. The seats were upholstered in soft, dark leather that smelled of money and timeless quality. There was no music playing, no sound at all save for the faint, almost subliminal hum of the engine and the soft whisper of the climate control. Ilara sat staring out at the impressionistic smear of the city, her hand resting on her cheek. The initial, sharp sting had subsided into a deep, throbbing ache. Her skin felt hot and tight. In the reflection of the darkened glass, she could see the faint, angry discoloration already beginning to bloom across her cheekbone, a ugly purple flower planted by Marcus's hand. Julian sat beside her, not touching her, not speaking. He simply occupied the space, a bastion of calm. He was not looking at her, but she could feel his attention, a steady, unwavering presence. He was giving her the gift of silence, allowing her the space to process the violent rupture that had just occurred in her life. She was grateful for it. Words felt inadequate, intrusive. She thought about the past hour, the past 2 years. She had been so careful. After leaving Marcus 3 days ago, taking nothing but a small bag and the new life growing inside her, she had covered her tracks meticulously. She had stayed at a small anonymous hotel, paid in cash, and confided in no one but Maya. She had believed she was safe, that his pride would be too great to cause a scene at her place of work. She had underestimated his possessiveness. She had overestimated his rationality. It was a mistake she would not have survived if not for Julian. The thought of him sent a complex wave of emotions through her. Relief, so profound it was almost painful. Gratitude, deep and overwhelming. And a sliver of something else, something akin to apprehension. Julian's world was a world of absolute power and control, a gilded cage far more vast and intricate than the one Marcus had tried to build around her. She had just escaped one form of possession. She was wary of stumbling into another, no matter how benevolent. "He will not bother you again," Julian said, his voice cutting cleanly through the silence. It was a simple statement, delivered with the flat finality of a historical fact. Ilara turned her head slowly to look at him. His profile was calm, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, though they had a driver. "What does Article 5 mean?" she asked, her voice a little hoarse. Julian was quiet for a moment. "It's a corporate dissolution protocol," he said, his explanation deceptively simple. "For hostile entities that pose an existential threat to the organization's interests or personnel." "Am I personnel?" she asked, a faint edge of her old, sharp wit returning. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so fleeting she might have imagined it. "You are family," he corrected gently. "The protocols are more stringent for family." The car slowed, turning smoothly into a private underground entrance. A heavy steel gate rolled silently shut behind them, sealing them off from the city. They were in the foundations of a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a modern glass and steel monolith known simply as the Vance Tower. It was Julian's home, his office, his fortress. The private elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. There were no buttons. The car simply knew where it was going. It opened directly into a space that was less an apartment and more a personal kingdom in the sky. The penthouse was a vast, open expanse of glass walls, polished marble floors, and minimalist furniture in shades of gray, black, and white. It was stunningly beautiful and profoundly sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to the concept of power. The entire western wall was a single sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city sprawling below them as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of bruised orange and purple. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair swept into an elegant chignon was waiting for them as the elevator doors opened. She wore a simple, impeccably cut black dress. This was Mrs. Gable, who had been Julian's housekeeper, and before that, his and Alara's childhood nanny, for as long as Alara could remember. Mrs. Gable's warm gaze fell on Alara, and her professional composure dissolved into one of pure maternal concern. She rushed forward, her hands hovering as if she didn't know where to touch first. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, her eyes welling up as she saw the dark mark on Alara's cheek. Julian called, "Come, sit down." She led Alara toward a large, surprisingly comfortable sofa that faced the window wall. Julian remained by the elevator, speaking in low tones to Elias, who had appeared as silently as ever. "Let me get you something," Mrs. Gable said, fussing over her. "Some tea? Something to eat? An ice pack for that awful bruise." Her voice trembled with a gentle fury on Alara's behalf. "An ice pack would be wonderful, thank you," Alara said, her voice small. The kindness was beginning to erode her defenses in a way Marcus's cruelty never could. As Mrs. Gable hurried away, Julian concluded his conversation. Elias gave a final sharp nod and then vanished back into the elevator. The doors closed, and Julian was alone with her in the vast, silent space. He walked over and sat not on the sofa with her, but in a sleek armchair opposite, maintaining a respectful distance. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing strong forearms and an expensive, understated watch. "My mother is on her way," he announced quietly. She insisted. Alara's heart clenched. Their mother. A woman of formidable grace and iron will. She hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year, a casualty of the self-imposed isolation Marcus had demanded. The shame of that, of allowing him to sever those ties, washed over her. "Julian, she began, not knowing what to say. "I'm sorry you had to get involved. I had it under control." The words tasted like a lie even as she said them. He did not challenge her. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to control it alone anymore, Ilara. That's what family is for." He paused, his eyes flicking to her stomach. "How far along are you?" 16 weeks, she answered automatically. He nodded slowly, a universe of calculations happening behind his calm facade. He was recalibrating the world to account for this new fact, this new life. Mrs. Gable returned with a soft, towel-wrapped ice pack and a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Alara took the ice pack with a murmur of thanks and pressed it gently to her cheek, hissing softly at the cold contact. "I have had Dr. Allister clear his schedule for tomorrow morning," Julian continued, his tone practical, businesslike. "He's the best obstetrician in the city. He'll meet you here. No need to go to a clinic. I've also engaged a legal team. They will handle everything regarding your separation from Mr. Kwan. You will not have to speak to him or see him again." It was all so efficient, so seamless. A wave of his hand, and the messy, terrifying problems of her life were being neatly packaged and resolved by teams of expensive professionals. It was disorienting. She was used to fighting her own battles, to navigating her own crises. To have it all handled was a relief so immense it felt like a weight pressing down on her. "Julian, it's too much," she said, shaking her head. "I can find my own doctor. I can get my own lawyer." "Why?" he asked, a genuine question. Why would you when I can provide the best? You are my sister. Your child is my nephew or niece. You will both have the best of everything. This is not a negotiation." There it was, the iron will beneath the silk. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of his reality, a reality he was now extending to include her. She was part of his world now, whether she was ready for it or not. She looked away from him, out at the sprawling city below. From up here, it looked so orderly, a grid of glittering lights and perfect lines. It was a lie. Down there, it was a chaotic mess of noise and pain and struggle. Marcus was down there somewhere, being dismantled by Article 5. She was up here, in a silent palace in the sky, being protected. It was a dizzying, terrifying exchange. She took a deep breath, the sterile, climate-controlled air filling her lungs. She had to hold on to herself. She had to remember the woman who had walked out of that apartment 3 days ago, the woman who had chosen freedom over comfort, uncertainty over abuse. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Julian," she said, her voice finding its strength again. She looked at him directly, meeting his steady gaze. "I will accept your help. I will accept your protection, for the baby and for myself. But I am not a problem to be managed. I am not a hostile entity to be neutralized. I am your sister, and I will make my own decisions." For the first time since he had appeared in that corridor, Julian's calm expression broke into a genuine, slow smile. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of power and leaving only the warm, familiar affection of the boy she had grown up with. "I never for a moment thought otherwise," he said. "It's good to have you home, Ilara." The days that followed settled into a strange, new rhythm. Ilara lived in a state of suspended reality, a guest in the quiet, opulent stratosphere of Julian's world. He gave her a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment with Marcus, decorated in soft creams and blues, with a private balcony that overlooked the sunrise. Mrs. Gable attended to her with a quiet, unobtrusive care, ensuring she ate, rested, and wanted for nothing. It was a life of profound safety and profound disorientation. After years of walking on eggshells, of managing Marcus's volatile moods and navigating his demands, the sheer peace of Julian's home was deafening. There were no sudden rages, no passive-aggressive silences, no love offered and withdrawn as a tool of control. There was only a calm, consistent, and somewhat distant affection. Ilara spent her time reading, walking the length of the vast penthouse, and talking for hours on the phone with their mother, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor had arrived the day after the incident, a whirlwind of maternal fury and tailored silk. She had held Ilara, cried with her, and then proceeded to organize a team to retrieve the few personal items Ilara had left behind, her voice on the phone crisp with commands that made it clear she was her son's mother. Having mended that bridge, their daily calls became a lifeline for Ilara, a connection to a part of herself she had almost lost. She asserted her independence in small ways. She insisted on making her own breakfast, a simple act of normalcy in a world where everything was provided. She spent hours online, researching pediatric foundations and public health initiatives, formulating a plan for her own future, a career she could build that had nothing to do with Julian's empire or Marcus's tainted money. She was an excellent nurse with a mind for organization and care systems. She would not let that part of herself atrophy. Julian was a quiet, constant presence. He worked from a sprawling office on the far side of the penthouse, but they shared meals together in a minimalist dining room with a view that could make a person dizzy. Their conversations were often stilted at first, two siblings who were also strangers, rediscovering the grammar of their relationship. They had been adopted into the Vance family at different ages, he as a solemn, watchful boy of 10, she as a baby. They had grown up as brother and sister, but his path had led him to an Ivy League education and the helm of a global corporation, while hers had led to nursing school and, eventually, to Marcus. He never pressed her to talk about Marcus. Instead, he asked about her work at the hospital, about her ideas for improving patient care. He listened with an unnerving focus, his intelligent eyes absorbing everything. He was not just hearing her, he was analyzing her, understanding her competence in a way no one, not even she herself, had fully appreciated. One evening, as they sat on the main balcony, the city lights a galaxy at their feet, she finally asked the question that had been hovering between them. "What happened to him, Julian?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He took a slow sip of his water. "Article 5 is a comprehensive asset dissolution," he said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "It's designed to be quiet, fast, and total. We started by acquiring the debt on his primary real estate holdings in Seoul and New York. The lenders were happy to sell at a premium." Ilara listened, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Simultaneously," he continued, "we initiated a hostile takeover of his parent company, Kwan Industries. It was surprisingly vulnerable. He used a great deal of leverage, pledging company stock against personal loans for his lifestyle. It's a common mistake for men like him. They confuse liquidity with wealth." He paused. "By the time he was escorted out of the hospital, we already controlled a 40% stake. By the time he arrived at his apartment, we had a controlling 51%. The board was convened for an emergency session that evening. He was removed as CEO and chairman. It was so brutal, so bloodless. A corporate execution. His personal assets were next," Julian said, his voice dropping even lower. "The cars, the art, the properties held in his name. Most were leveraged. The banks that held his credit lines now answer to me. We called in the loans, all of them, at once." Ilara stared at him, horrified and, to her shame, mesmerized. This was the nature of his power. It was not the brutish physical power of a mafia boss. It was the deep structural power of a sovereign, the power to unmake a man with a series of phone calls and wire transfers. "He is left with nothing," Julian concluded. "Less than nothing. He has debts he will never be able to repay. His name has been removed from every social and professional registry. His credit is non-existent. As of this morning, he was evicted from his penthouse. The locks were changed by men on my payroll." "Where is he?" she whispered. "I don't know," Julian said, and she knew he was telling the truth. He had not destroyed Marcus and then tracked his fall. He had simply deleted him. He was no longer a factor. He was irrelevant. "He is no longer your concern, Ilara. He no longer exists in our world." The totality of it was terrifying. It was a power that could protect her, but it was also a power that could erase a person from existence. She looked at this man who was her brother, this quiet, handsome man who could command such apocalyptic force, and felt a tremor of fear mixed with her gratitude. But then he turned to her, and the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding concern. "The first ultrasound is tomorrow," he said softly. "I cleared my morning. I'd like to come with you if you'll have me." And in that simple, gentle request, she saw the other side of his power, the protective side, the side that had built this fortress around her, not to cage her, but to give her a place to finally heal. "I'd like that," she said, and for the first time, a real, genuine smile reached her eyes. "I'd like that very much." Marcus Kwan believed in his own mythology. It was his greatest strength and his most fatal flaw. He had built his empire on a foundation of audacious risks, brutal negotiations, and a carefully cultivated aura of invincibility. He was the young tiger of the Seoul underworld, a man who had clawed his way from the grimy streets to the glittering boardrooms, leaving a trail of broken rivals in his wake. For the first 3 days after his public humiliation at the hospital, he existed in a state of pure, unadulterated rage. He holed up in his penthouse, the one he still had at that point, and broke things. Expensive things. An antique vase, a tablet computer, a bottle of whiskey that cost more than a car. He saw the incident not as a defeat, but as an affront, a temporary and insulting setback. "Give her 3 days," he snarled to his reflection in a cracked mirror. "She'll come crawling back. She has nothing, no one. She needs me. He did not understand the nature of the abyss that had opened beneath him. He saw Julian Vance as just another rich man, an old-money dilettante who had gotten lucky. He wildly underestimated the speed and ruthlessness of the world Julian inhabited. He thought this was a battle for a woman. Julian knew it was a corporate extermination. The first sign that his mythology was beginning to crumble came on the fourth day. His corporate credit card was declined at his favorite restaurant. It was an embarrassment, a clerical error, he told himself. He paid with a personal card. The next day, that card was also declined. Panic, cold and unfamiliar, began to prickle at the edges of his rage. He called his office, but his personal assistant, a woman who had once trembled when he spoke, informed him in a cool, professional voice that she could not put him through to the board. When he demanded to know why, she simply said, "Your access has been revoked, Mr. Kwan." Then she hung up. He was a man watching his own reflection in a pool of water as it slowly drained away. The calls started coming in, from his lawyers, who informed him they were dropping him as a client due to a conflict of interest. From his bank manager, who informed him his lines of credit were being called in, effective immediately. From the concierge of his building, who informed him that a new owner had taken possession and his lease was terminated. He was being erased. His arrogance, however, was a stubborn and deeply rooted weed. He refused to believe it was over. This was a tactic, a negotiation. Vance was trying to scare him, and Alara was at the center of it. If he could get to her, he could undo all of this. He could force her to call off her brother. He made his fatal miscalculation. He decided to escalate. Blinded by his own delusion, he hired a team of private investigators to find her. It was a foolish, desperate move. The investigators were clumsy and obvious, and Elias, Julian's silent shadow, had them identified and compromised within hours. Julian allowed them to continue, turning their efforts into his own personal intelligence stream. Then, Marcus played what he thought was his trump card. He filed a frivolous, aggressive lawsuit. He claimed Alara was emotionally unstable, a danger to their unborn child. He petitioned for sole custody upon the child's birth and filed an emergency motion to have her submitted to a psychiatric evaluation. He had his lawyers leak the filing to a notorious gossip columnist, hoping the public humiliation would force her back into his arms, desperate to make it all go away. It was the act of a man who did not understand he was already a ghost. In the penthouse, Ilara read the article on a tablet, her face pale, her hands trembling. "He's claiming I'm insane," she whispered, her voice full of a weary, wounded disbelief. "He's trying to take my baby." Julian, who was sitting across from her in the sunlit morning room, took the tablet from her hands and set it aside. His face was a mask of cold fury, the likes of which she had not seen since the hospital. "This is not about the baby," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is about him trying to reclaim an asset he believes he owns. He is trying to wound you because he is wounded." He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city. "He has made a grave error. He has given us a public forum." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her fear a cold weight in her chest. He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with a protective fire. "I am going to finish it," he said, in a way that everyone can see. He wanted a public stage. I will give him one. The stage was to be the Obsidian Gala, the city's most exclusive and high-profile charity event, held annually at the Vance Museum of Modern Art. It was the pinnacle of the social calendar, an event where the city's true power players gathered. Julian, as the primary benefactor, was the evening's host and keynote speaker. Marcus, whose name had been unceremoniously struck from the guest list, saw it as his last, best chance. He was a cornered animal, all instinct and desperation. He would crash the party. He would confront Alara in front of everyone, paint her as the ungrateful, unstable woman from his lawsuit. He would create a scene so massive, so public, that Vance would have to negotiate with him just to make it stop. He still believed he had something to negotiate with. He was a dead man walking, and he was about to voluntarily step into his own coffin. On the night of the gala, Ilara stood before the mirror in her suite. She was wearing an architecturally precise gown of deep emerald silk that had been tailored to accommodate her now prominent baby bump. Her hair was swept up, and the bruise on her cheek, now a faint yellow shadow, was skillfully concealed with makeup. She looked elegant, regal, and terrified. "I can't do this, Julian," she said to his reflection. He stood behind her, impossibly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. "I can't face all those people. What if he's there?" "He will be there," Julian said calmly. "He thinks he is walking into a confrontation. In reality, he is walking into a pre-written epilogue." He reached out and placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch warm and steady. "You have nothing to fear. Tonight is not about him. It is about you." He met her eyes in the mirror, his gaze intense. "For years, you have been the most capable person in every room you've been in, and no one has seen it. They saw a pretty face, a quiet woman, an accessory. Tonight, they will see you as you are." His confidence was a shield. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. "Okay." Together, they descended to the gala. The museum was a symphony of sparkling crystal, quiet music, and the low murmur of powerful people. As they entered, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to them. Julian, the quiet sovereign, and the beautiful, mysterious, pregnant woman at his side. Whispers followed them like a breeze. They were standing in a small, private circle with the mayor and a few other city luminaries when it happened. A commotion near the entrance. A raised voice, raw and desperate. Marcus had gotten past the outer layer of security, his disheveled appearance and wild eyes a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the guests. "Ilara!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. He pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mask of sweat and desperation. He had lost weight, and his expensive, ill-fitting suit hung on him like a shroud. He looked like a ghost haunting the scene of his former glory. Security moved to intercept him, but Julian raised a single, subtle hand, and they froze. He wanted this. He wanted it to play out. Marcus stumbled to a halt before their group, his wild eyes fixing on Ilara. He ignored Julian completely. That was his first mistake. "Ilara, you have to stop this," he pleaded, his voice loud and ragged. "Tell them to stop. This has gone far enough. We can fix this. You and me. For the baby." Ilara stood her ground, her chin held high. She did not flinch. "There is nothing to fix, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and cold. "You need to leave." "Leave?" He let out a hysterical laugh. "I'm not leaving without you. You owe me. You have an obligation to me, to our child." He took a step closer, his hand reaching for her arm, a grim echo of his assault in the hospital. Before he could touch her, Julian moved. It was not a fast movement, but it was absolute. He stepped between them, a calm, immovable wall of black tuxedo. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at Elias, who was standing nearby, holding an iPad. "Elias," Julian said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "what was the final closing price on Quan Industries stock yesterday?" Elias, his face impassive, read from the screen. 17 cents a share, sir. Down from $112 3 weeks ago. Marcus stared, confused. "What are you talking about?" Julian finally turned his gaze to Marcus. There was no anger in his eyes. There was nothing but a profound, chilling pity. "I'm talking about the company you used to own, Mr. Kwan, the one my foundation acquired in a private fire sale this morning. We're restructuring it. The name Kwan will be removed from all branding by the end of the month." He took the iPad from Elias. He swiped the screen. "This is the deed to your apartment, the one you were evicted from. It's a lovely space. We're donating it to a shelter for battered women." He swiped again. "This is the portfolio of your father's company, the one he built from nothing. You leveraged it to the hilt to fund your disastrous expansion into the American market. As of yesterday, I own his legacy too. I'm told he is very disappointed. He called my office this morning to apologize for your behavior. Each sentence was a hammer blow, dismantling Marcus's reality piece by piece in front of an audience of the most powerful people in the city. Marcus's face had gone from red to white to a mottled, sickly gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You filed a lawsuit," Julian continued, his voice relentless and calm. "You claimed my sister was unstable. You leaked it to the press. My legal team has filed a countersuit for defamation and harassment. They have a sworn affidavit from the nurse who witnessed you strike her. They have the security footage from the hospital corridor. They have a detailed record of your abuse, provided by 3 of your former assistants who are tired of being silent. The damages we are seeking will exceed your net worth by a factor of 100. You will be paying them for the rest of your life." Julian lowered the iPad. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "You came here tonight thinking you had something to bargain with. You have nothing. You are nothing. You are a ghost, haunting a world that has already forgotten you. You don't exist." The finality of those words broke him. Marcus Quan, the arrogant tyrant, the man who believed he was a king, crumpled. It was not a slow collapse. It was a sudden, total implosion of spirit and body. His knees buckled, and he fell to the polished marble floor with a soft, pathetic thud. He knelt there amidst the glittering crowd, his body racked with great, heaving sobs. The sounds were raw and animalistic, the sounds of a man whose entire universe had been utterly and irrevocably annihilated in the space of 2 minutes. He begged. "Please," he wept, the word dissolving into incoherent babble. "Please don't. I'm sorry. Please." Not because he was sorry, because he was caught. The performance was over. There was nothing left but the hollow, pathetic man underneath. Julian watched him for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The security guards, who had been waiting, moved in. They lifted the sobbing, broken man from the floor and dragged him away, his expensive shoes scuffing on the marble. He did not resist. He was gone, a ghost exorcised from the room, leaving behind only a profound and ringing silence. The entire room had witnessed it. The quiet, surgical destruction of a man. Julian turned back to the silent, watching crowd. He took the microphone from the stunned mayor. His composure was absolute. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice calm and steady, filling the vast hall. "Some old business that needed to be concluded." He then turned and looked at Alara, his eyes softening. He held out a hand to her, and she took it, her fingers lacing with his. He led her to the small stage at the front of the room. He stood beside her, his hand a warm, solid presence in hers. "Every year," he began, addressing the crowd, "we gather here to support the future of this city. We talk about new buildings, new initiatives. But the future is not built of steel and glass. It is built by people, people of vision, of competence, and of quiet, unyielding strength." He turned his body slightly, presenting her to the room. "For too long, the most capable person in this city has been working in the shadows, her brilliance uncredited, her grace unseen. Many of you know her only as my sister. But that is the least interesting thing about her." He smiled, a genuine, proud smile. "Tonight, the Vance Foundation is announcing its largest ever endowment, the Ilara Vance Center for Pediatric and Maternal Health. It will be a new wing of our city's main hospital, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to providing world-class care regardless of a patient's ability to pay. And it will be built, managed, and directed by its chief architect and visionary." He raised their joined hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to the future of healthcare in this city, my sister, Ilara Vance." A wave of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. It was not polite, obligatory applause. It was a roar, a wave of thunderous, genuine acclaim. They were applauding her strength, her survival, her vindication. They were applauding the quiet, pregnant woman in the emerald gown who had faced down her monster and won. Alara stood in the warm, golden light, the sound washing over her. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief, of release. The heavy, invisible weight she had been carrying for so long, the weight of shame and silence and endurance, simply dissolved. She looked at Julian, her brother, her protector, her champion. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at her, his eyes filled with a pride and affection so profound it took her breath away. In that moment, standing in the light, her hand in his, she was not a victim. She was not an asset. She was not a possession. She was Elara Vance, and she was finally, breathtakingly free. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the museum had fallen silent, they stood on the private balcony of the penthouse. The city glittered below them, a sea of diamonds scattered on black velvet. A cool breeze whispered past, carrying the distant, muted sounds of a world that was still turning, oblivious to the cataclysm and resurrection that had occurred in their small corner of it. Elara had changed out of her gown and into a soft cashmere robe. She leaned against the railing, her hands cradling a warm mug of decaffeinated tea. She felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet so deep it felt like the first real silence she had known in years. It was not the tense silence of waiting for an explosion, nor the empty silence of loneliness. It was the calm, settled silence of a story that has reached its proper ending. Julian stood beside her, a silent, comforting presence. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and tie, and with his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, he looked less like a corporate sovereign and more like the brother she remembered, albeit a version of him forged in fire and power. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft in the vastness of the night. It felt like such a small, inadequate word for what he had done. He had not just saved her, he had given her back to herself. "There is nothing to thank me for," he replied, his gaze on the horizon. "He hurt you. He threatened my family. There was only ever going to be one outcome." She was silent for a moment, watching the distant, tiny lights of cars moving on faraway highways. "It was total," she said. "The way you dismantled him. It was terrifying." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Power is a tool, Elara. It can be used to build or to break. For men like Marcus, it is a weapon of ego, a means to dominate. They perform with it. They are loud. It makes them feel strong." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I prefer my power to be quiet, structural, the kind you don't see until it's too late. I don't use it to feel strong. I use it to protect what is mine." The word mine hung in the air between them. In Marcus's mouth, it had been a word of ownership, of possession. In Julian's, it felt different. It felt like a promise, a perimeter, a shield. She reached out and placed her free hand on his arm. His muscles were tense beneath the fine cotton of his shirt. "I'm not yours to protect, Julian," she said gently, but with a firm clarity. "Not in that way." He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. A complex emotion flickered in his eyes. Understanding, respect, and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. "I know," he said. "You are not a possession. You are a partner. In this family, in the foundation, in everything that comes next." He covered her hand with his own. His was large and warm, enveloping hers completely. It did not feel like a cage. It felt like an anchor. "I just want you to be safe," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I just want you to be happy." A single tear escaped her and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. "I think," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm getting there." They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, sharing the quiet moment, the city breathing beneath them. The future, which had once been a terrifying, formless fog, was beginning to take shape. It was a future with a child, a career she would build on her own terms, a family that had been broken and was now reforged, stronger than before. And it was a future with Julian, her brother, her protector, and now something more. The bond between them was shifting, the old lines of their sibling relationship blurring and reforming into something new, something forged in crisis and tempered by mutual respect. It was not the fiery, destructive passion she had known with Marcus. It was something quieter, deeper, the slow, steady growth of a partnership of equals. It was the safety of being truly seen and the disorienting relief of being truly known. Weeks later, Ilara stood in the middle of a room flooded with soft, afternoon light. The walls were painted a gentle, soothing shade of sage green. A simple, elegant crib of light-colored wood stood against one wall. A comfortable rocking chair was angled in the corner, a soft blanket draped over its arm. It was the nursery. Her nursery. In her own new apartment, a beautiful, spacious home in a quiet, secure building not far from the Vance Tower. Julian had bought the building, of course, but he had put the deed to her apartment solely in her name, a gesture of respect for her independence that meant more to her than any grand display. She ran a hand over the smooth wood of the crib, a real smile touching her lips. The baby, a girl she now knew, kicked gently within her, a secret, happy hello. The door opened and Julian walked in. He was carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He had come straight from his office, still in one of his dark, expensive suits, but he had loosened his tie. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He handed her a glass. "Elias says you've been interviewing architects for the new wing all day," he said, his voice laced with a gentle, teasing admonishment. "I thought you were supposed to be resting." "I was," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I was resting my feet. My brain was working. The preliminary designs are incredible." She was alive with purpose, her intelligence and competence finally given a field on which to play. She was not just surviving, she was building. He watched her, a look of quiet admiration on his face. He leaned against the doorframe, sipping his tea. "You're happy," he stated. It was not a question. "I am," she confirmed. The words felt solid, real. "It's a strange feeling. Peace." He nodded. "It suits you." They were quiet for a moment, the only sound the faint clinking of ice in their glasses. He looked around the room, at the crib, at the small stack of children's books on a low shelf. "She's going to have your eyes," he said softly. "She's going to have your stubbornness," Ilara retorted with a smile. He smiled back, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. He crossed the room and stood before her. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently, tentatively, placed it on her belly, over the spot where his niece was growing. His touch was warm and reverent. It was a moment of profound, unspoken intimacy. A family built not from a perfect plan, but from the messy, complicated, and beautiful reality of their lives. A family built from honesty, from complication, and from the daily, deliberate choice to stay, to protect, to build, and to love. Ilara leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. The quiet exhaustion of long-term suffering had finally given way to the warm, steady peace of finding safety. The sharp terror of immediate threat had been replaced by the cold clarity of a final decision. The disorienting relief of being seen and protected had settled into the cathartic satisfaction of a new beginning. She was home, not in a place, but in a state of being, vindicated, empowered, and safe. She looked towards the future, not as a destination to be reached, but as a path to be walked, one quiet, steady, and deliberate step at a time. And for the first time in a very long time, she knew she would not be walking it alone.